Fallout London is one of the best things to happen to the Fallout franchise in years. Not only is it the best Fallout mod ever made, it stands up against some of the best titles in the series. When you take a step back and you think about how this mod was created, it's even more impressive. This isn't a DLC. This is a fully voiced, fleshed out mod created by a passionate development team on their own time and their own money. Looking at Bethesda's current trajectory with their games, this is probably the closest we're going to get to Fallout 5 in this decade. Fallout London not only blew away my expectations, but made me think, this is everything a Fallout game should be. We live in a world where Bethesda's charging $7 for a single quest in Starfield, while the modding community is creating games like this all for free. Fallout London is a labour of love, made by people who genuinely care for the franchise, and the fact that it even exists just shows how passionate the modding community really is. I put a link to download the mod in the description, along with a link to their Patreon. These guys have spent years making this possible, so you should definitely consider supporting them. However, for me, it just misses the mark of a masterpiece. There's one major problem with the main story, but I'll get into that later in the video. There's also a fair amount of smaller problems with the game. Some carried over from Fallout 4, but others are problems specifically that come from London itself. There's a huge amount of crashing and bugs. The perks are mostly carried over from 4, which feels like a missed opportunity. A lot of areas are locked off until you find the right quest, and a fair amount of those quests just boil down to simple fetch quests, which doesn't make for the most interesting gameplay. Despite all this, Fallout London is a worthy addition to the franchise, and if you haven't played it yet, hopefully this video will convince you why it deserves your attention. Fallout London takes place in, well, London, obviously, but it's set in the year 2237, 50 years before the events of Fallout 4. You play as the Wayfarer, an escaped test subject just trying to find their next Fesco meal deal, unsure about your identity and your connection to a mysterious group known as Angel. Think the Institute, but with bad teeth. You must venture forth across London to uncover the secrets behind your past and ultimately decide the fate of London. Now, London itself is one of the best environments I've seen in any Fallout game. The map is huge. It's roughly the size of Boston from Fallout 4, and there's so many iconic places to see. You can visit the London Eye, Tower Bridge, Big Ben, the Bank of the Wank of England. The map also has multiple boroughs that act like their own map within a map. They're each extremely dense and packed with so many quests to complete, locations to explore, characters to meet, and enemies to kill. Seriously, some of these boroughs are huge, and everyone has its own unique style. Take Westminster for example. The streets are clean, the people are all dressed up and full of themselves, and they even have working taxis and trains. Then go somewhere like Islington, where half the population is cosplaying This Is England, while the other half just coughed up their last lung. Seriously though, just look at this map. It would take you hours to visit every single one of these locations, and even longer if you play without fast travel like I did. However, the game does encourage that type of playstyle by introducing other forms of travel that come at a cost. Want to cross the Thames? No problem. You can either traverse through a radiated tunnel full of ghouls in one of the scariest moments in any Fallout game, or pay Neil Newborn 50 tickets and he'll sort you out. It's good to have options. I really love when games add different options to traverse the map. It's so nice to actually be immersed in the world while I'm traveling through it, especially as somebody who doesn't really do fast travel. But that's just me. My only gripe with some of the locations is that they're locked off until you start certain quest lines. I found myself running into locked doors, not knowing if this was hiding some amazing quest or if it's just an empty building. This doesn't happen everywhere, and you can explore a large portion of the map without progressing the main story too far, but it's just something to be aware of. Also, their use of doors differs from Bethesda's usual style, which definitely threw me off at first. My expectation when I see a door like this in a Fallout game is I can open it. However, the developers of this game had something different in mind. They might have reused a few assets here and there, and it definitely got a little bit confusing when I was in the Thames Haven portion of the game, but once you get used to it, once you know it's there, you can kind of navigate it okay. When you do finally get access to these locations, you can tell they've been meticulously created with a lot of attention to detail. Take Thames Haven for example, an underground city full of fish people. The whole area looks fantastic and feels like an actual city. They could have easily put 50% less effort into this place, but they went the extra mile and made it fit perfectly with the people who live there. It really feels like this is what it would look like if somebody turned a tube station into a home for irradiated fish people. Overall, Fallout London delivers on giving you that authentic British experience, whether it's going to the pub with your mates, making a cup of tea, or playing cricket with the Beefeaters on Tower Bridge. This game is the epitome of British culture. The attention to detail is actually insane. From the iconic landmarks that are recognisable around the world, to the smallest things that only British people would know about. Wait a minute, is that horse meat? Holy crap, I can't believe they referenced that. Seriously, playing this game as a British person, there were so many times I lost my mind when I found something I never thought I would ever see in a video game. Gregori's Bakery. Oh my god, is that Greg's? Please tell me they've got sausage rolls behind the counter. It's not just the little things. There's a ton of references to British movies, TV shows, and culture in general, all spread across London. I had to explain to one of my American friends that this entire location is just a reference to a classic TV show that every British person will know. Even though these kind of things will go over some people's head, I definitely want to take a moment to appreciate the attention to detail that they put into this game. From custard creams and Bakewell tarts to how dangerous the Thames is, this game accurately depicts everyday life in Britain better than any game I've seen before. Speaking of everyday British life, let's talk about how dangerous London is. And by that I mean the enemies you're going to encounter. You have your usual ghouls and mirelurks, although they're called mittenlurks in this game, but essentially the same thing. But you also have entirely new creatures like the dryads, the foxes, and the leeches. There's even new robots like the Atkins, the postboxers, and these f***ers. Staples like Deathclaws have been replaced with classic children's TV characters. And the most dangerous enemy of them all? The Ladybird. Which wasn't British enough until the most recent patch. All the new enemies you encounter are both beautifully designed and distinctly British. Some definitely prove to be a little bit of a challenge, especially early on, but they are fun to fight, and not once did any of them break my immersion. Essentially, they took a bunch of creatures that you would find all over the UK and dipped them in enough radiation that would rival the Master's creations. Seriously, how many legs does a horse need? Despite the lack of 1950s retro American culture, Fallout London still feels at home in the Fallout universe. Instead of caps, you have tickets. Instead of a Pip-Boy, you have an Attaboy. Instead of your trusty Vault 13 canteen, you have and it all works. The fact that there's no Vault-Tec or Brotherhood of Steel doesn't take away from the Fallout experience at all. It still feels like Fallout. And all the factions, locations, weapons, chems, characters, and companions make sense within the game's universe. There are a few callbacks to the original games, but the developers know when to keep their distance. One of Fallout's main strengths is its factions, and that's no different here. Fallout London introduces groups that not only fit perfectly into the Fallout universe, but also reflect the unique aspects of the UK. In my opinion, this is one of the game's most impressive features. You have the three main factions, Camelot, Angel, and the Fifth Column. I do have a lot I want to say about these groups, but I'll talk more about that later on. The other factions are a mixed bag of toffs, punks, peaky blinders, finance bros, World War II reenactors, mods, and skinheads. They control certain districts and faction questlines separate to the main story. It's up to you which factions you side with and which ones you kill off. Overall, these factions find the perfect balance between representing the different aspects of UK culture and being just crazy enough to fit seamlessly into a Fallout game. Whilst these faction questlines don't really affect the main story, they still provide you with interesting characters and experiences. For example, one of the Vagabond quests had me acquiring a train full of supplies however I saw fit, or I could destroy it and cause another faction a bunch of problems. Depending on my choices, certain characters would feel differently about me, and as I found out later on, it would have an important impact on a particular quest near the end of their story. It's this level of detail that really makes this game special for me. You can tell that a lot of effort has been put in to ensure that the player feels like they're actually making an impact on the faction they're working with. And don't worry if you hate travelling alone. There's a selection of companions you find as you make your way across London. Each of them has their own personal stories, quirks, and quests to complete, netting you some major BFF points and a few interesting items. They vary from hunting down treasures to discovering what it means to truly have a home. Each of the companions has a surprisingly deep backstory, which helped me view them as more than just a pack mule to carry all my telephones and typewriters. I found myself genuinely enjoying their company and wondering what one-liner they'd spit out next. Speaking of one-liners, let's talk about the voice acting. For the most part, lines were delivered professionally, and were on the same quality of what I'd expect from Bethesda. However, there were a few moments that reminded me that this is a mod, not a game.
The new skin procedure is a marvelous mix of cutting-edge technology. Oh my god, I can't. I'm going insane.
Despite this and a few technical issues, the voice acting was solid. And the fact that they managed to get John Burkow, an actual Speaker of the House of Commons, to do voice work for this game is something I think should be applauded. Moving on to quests, London has plenty of them, from hunting down Shakespeare's lost plays to blowing up the London Eye. I found that most quests were varied and interesting enough to capture you from the start. Whenever I play a Fallout game, I usually just rack up a bunch of quests and just complete them whenever. But here, I actually found myself wanting to complete each individual quest as I found them. There's so many quests in this game that just stand out to me for being unique and creative, and that is something that the Fallout London team gets all the credit for. However, like I said in the intro, some of them just boil down to simple fetch quests. Albeit with interesting characters and some nice rewards at the end, it can still be fairly repetitive. However, the overall experience of completing quests felt as good as, if not better, than all the other games in the series, with fun dialogue and action choices that Bethesda wouldn't even dare to include in their titles.
You!
Q2!
You!
You can tell the writing has been heavily inspired by your options in New Vegas, which is definitely something we need more of, not less of, in the Fallout franchise. The first thing you'll notice after attempting to fight your first hooligan is just how hard this game is at the start. Ammo is scarce, stimpaks and Radaway are non-existent, and if you even dare dip your toe in the Thames, you're gonna have a bad time. To me, this is more of a positive than a negative. Bethesda games over time have gotten easier and easier to the point where I feel like I need to mod in the difficulty. Not only does Fallout London not try and hold your hand, they actively try and cut it off when you're not looking. This made my first 15 hours of gameplay a real struggle, which is something I just haven't really felt since the early days of Fallout New Vegas. Although some people may be critical of the decision to make the game so difficult, I think this was the right thing for them to do. I genuinely enjoyed my struggle of trying to survive in the city of London. The lack of ammo and tickets in the game really made me be creative. I started using melee weapons instead of guns, and honestly, it was a really satisfying experience. Even late game, I found myself more using melee weapons than actual guns. Mostly because some of the melee weapons were really good, but I'll get into that later. This kind of difficulty might put some of you off, but I would honestly encourage you just to embrace the difficulty and push through as much as you can. The experience is absolutely worth it. A lot of the RPG elements here have obviously been carried over from Fallout 4 because there's only so much they can really change. The combat and leveling system is the same, and they even kept the unique aspects such as crafting and settlement building. However, most of the weapons and armors have been completely redesigned from scratch, some of which even include custom animations, which is just a nice little bonus. A lot of the junk items as well have been completely redesigned with the theme of Britain in mind. Again, this is something they could have easily left alone and just carried over from Fallout 4, but they took the time to design custom pieces of junk and custom weapons that would fit nicely into the environment of London. They've even managed to include a feature that Bethesda themselves have said is impossible: climbing ladders. This alone shows how dedicated the team behind this game really is to giving you the best possible Fallout experience. They went out of their way to figure out something that the original developers couldn't, and if that doesn't convince you to play Fallout London, I don't know what will. When it comes to your character, you can tell they took the time to ensure that the player can roleplay however they want. There's options for low intelligence dialogue, quests you can complete with a high luck skill check, and perks that give you a unique insight into certain NPCs. When it comes to playstyles, there's enough weapon variety combined with how perks influence your skills to justify whatever you want. Like I said before, I usually don't use melee weapons, but this time around, I found myself hacking away at enemies more than usual since melee weapons were incredibly strong. This game definitely feels like it's been thoroughly tested and that level design has been a clear priority from day one. One aspect I really enjoyed comes from the start of the game. In Fallout 3 and 4, once you find out you're out of the vault, you can pretty much go wherever you want. However, in Fallout London, you're confined to Greenwich until you can find a way to cross the Thames. This is a similar tactic that Obsidian used at the start of Fallout New Vegas.
Our path was set by the travel agency.
That's for schoolgirls. Now here's a route with some chest hair.
This one little twist is an incredibly natural way of controlling the player's direction without them feeling like they're being forced. This type of structure only lasts until you cross the Thames for the first time, at which point your character's probably ready to take on the enemies of London. One thing I found really interesting on my playthrough was this little puzzle. The developers could have easily locked this door behind a terminal that required a password or a key, but they didn't. They designed a system of levers and switches that need to be pressed in the right order, and the only way to find the right order is to actually read the terminal on the wall. No markers guiding you, just good old-fashioned making notes and following through. It's places like this that really show how much creative freedom was truly expressed when making this mod. This is where Fallout London really shines. Since they're a small indie studio, they can try things that Bethesda wouldn't even dream of. They can really take risks with their game design that could potentially frustrate the player, but if done right, will ultimately make the experience more rewarding. My only real concern is how they handle the leveling system. It hasn't really changed much since Fallout 4, and I'm not sure if that's due to how the game runs, or if they just didn't feel like it needed changing. Fallout 4's system is definitely my least favourite out of all the games. It feels like a watered down version of the original, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I'd rather have a level cap of 50 with multiple skills and perk points per level level, then an uncapped level limit, and a single perk point that covers all your skills and abilities. Most times, I never really make it past level 50 to 60 anyway by the time I'm finished with the game. Just for reference, when I finished Fallout London, I was level 54. I will say that they have changed some of the perks to make them more British. However, the fact that none of these perks are unique in terms of their abilities is a little bit of a disappointment. This could just be down to the fact of how Fallout 4 plays, and it may have been too much effort to try and rebuild the entire system from scratch, which I can forgive. But as a player, I just felt like the leveling system wasn't good enough. I'm also not really a fan of the legendary loot system in this game. I find that about 80% of the time I always get legendaries like this that are just kind of useless to me. But occasionally you'll get something that's completely broken that will make it worthwhile. And I also appreciate the fact that they actually added some unique special weapons, just like those in Fallout 3 and New Vegas. These were definitely some of my favourite weapons to use in the game. Since this is a problem that's carried over from Fallout 4, I can't really blame the developers for including it, but it does feel like a missed opportunity that we didn't get some more unique perks. A key part of the Fallout experience has to be the music, specifically the radio. Yeah, the atmospheric music suits the world and it helps immerse you into the game, or at least that's what I've been told, because I just don't care. In all seriousness, they did do a fantastic job with the atmospherical music in this game. I'm just more of a radio guy when it comes to Fallout, so I'm going to be mainly focusing on the custom radio stations than the atmospherical music. The juxtaposition between butchering your enemies to Butcher Pete is what makes this game so unique. In Fallout London, you've got 3 radios to choose from. BBM's classical music, which is basically Institute radio with a British twist, Crystal Palace, which is Diamond City radio with a British twist, or a completely new radio station full of custom music called The Mend. At first, I couldn't really get into the new songs. I don't know what it was, I just wasn't really feeling them. But after 1 or 2 loops of the radio station, I just couldn't imagine myself walking around the streets of London without singing along. Going into this mod, I had no idea whether there would actually be custom radio stations or if it would all just be atmospherical music. But I was pleasantly surprised. They actually put the effort in and made custom songs. From what I could see online, a lot of these songs were purposely produced for the game itself. And if anybody's interested, there's a playlist on Spotify for The Mend. It'll be linked in the description. Honestly, to me, the songs feel like they find a perfect balance between being British enough and being Fallout enough. And the radio hosts themselves were actually a perfect fit. I found their moments between the music quite amusing rather than annoying. I will also say that the sound effects for this game were absolutely perfect. Reusing assets from Protect and Survive is such a smart move, and it works so well. For those of you who don't know, Protect and Survive was a public information campaign on civil defence produced by the British government back in the 70s. It essentially gave advice to the public on how to protect themselves during a nuclear attack. There's a certain jingle that will play whenever Smythe appears on a monitor. That was directly taken from a Protect and Survive information video, and every time I hear it, it genuinely sends shivers down my spine. So we've established that Fallout London can offer an incredible experience for any fan of the franchise, but what exactly stops it from being a masterpiece? Well, let's start with the most common complaint people have, the crashing. At the end of the day, this is a mod running on the base Fallout 4 game. With any mod, there comes risks of crashing, file corruptions, long loading screens, and many bugs. This is actually nothing new for Bethesda fans, as these are kind of part of just the experience of playing their games. However, I know some people who have been completely turned off this game because it just wouldn't work. A friend of mine who absolutely loves the Fallout franchise has yet to play this mod because he's having too many issues with the game. As unfortunate as all this is, I don't really hold it against Fallout London, specifically because of how beloved New Vegas is despite all the similar issues. Anybody who's played New Vegas on PC will know that it's a crashy, buggy mess at the best of times, and yet that game is considered one of the best Fallout games of all time. However, there are ways to help reduce the number of crashes you might encounter. The latest patch for the game includes Buffout 4, which helps massively reduce the amount of crashes you get. There's also the long loading screens that just seem to get worse the more you play. It's especially bad when you're loading into the outside world of London, but this is kind of something I expected with a mod of this size. However, there are mods that will help this issue. As for the performance, I didn't have that many issues, except for a few areas. But honestly, I'd rather have lower FPS and more detail in my world than a watered down version of Trafalgar Square. Besides, to me, it's still very much playable, and the City of London has a higher average frame rate than downtown Boston. Again, this issue can be solved by mods. There are other smaller issues I've had with the game. For example, a certain quest was so broken for me that I had to use console commands vigorously until it finally decided to work. Definitely left a sour taste in my mouth, but it's something I hope will be patched out in a future update. There's also no wearable power armor, which is a bit of a disappointment. I mean, look how cool this thing is. You took the time to put it into the game, but I can't wear it? Well, don't worry, someone's already made a mod for it. So if you really want to go all out cosplaying with Camelot, now you can. While I didn't experience this myself, I have been told that fast traveling in between boroughs can be as bad as Starfield in terms of loading screens. This is unfortunately a side effect of how the game's been designed, but it can make traveling around a little tedious. If there's one thing I took away from my time in London, is that a lot of locations seem to just have NPCs that wouldn't speak to me. While I understand it could be a lot of work to get NPCs to have specific dialogue in specific locations, it just made me feel like the locations had nothing to offer, besides one or two traders and a quest associated with it. While editing this video, they actually released the second patch for the game, which seems to have fixed some of the issues I've previously mentioned. I've decided to keep them in this video even if they're no longer a problem, because they were a part of my experience playing the game. A lot of the smaller issues have already been fixed by the community, but there's one major issue I have with the game that falls directly onto the shoulders of the development team, and that is making the final faction choice in the main story. I'm going to attempt to be as vague as possible since I don't really want to spoil the story for those who haven't played it yet, but there comes a certain point where the game forces you to side with a faction. My main problem with this is I only really knew about one of those factions up until that point, and that was the faction I definitely didn't want to side with. I knew the other two factions existed, but I'd yet to actually meet anyone from them who would talk to me. Whenever I tried, they would just spurt out generic dialogue. When I tried to enter their base to potentially meet their leader or learn more about them, I found myself locked out like a stray cat. Your first real introduction to them both happens at the same time during a particular quest in the main story. After speaking with them, I knew a little more about them, but not enough to make a well-informed decision. The only reason I even knew about their existence before the main story put me in that position was because I saw a couple of posters spread around London and I heard a couple of NPCs talking about them in passing. So, to help you make an informed decision, I'll give you a quick rundown of all the factions. Firstly, we have Camelot. They're ruled over by a man named King Arthur, a man so dedicated to democracy, he's willing to roleplay as a knight from the 5th century just to get his point across. They basically want to overthrow the greedy rich gentry of Westminster and ensure that all of London can benefit from their wealth. I think most people would agree when I say that Camelot is the good ending for this game. Next up is the 5th column. They're led by a woman named Eve Varney. Their goal is to tear down the establishment of London and rebuild a new empire from the ashes. Only that new empire will be rebuilt in the image of Eve. Essentially, they just want to control London with force. They're basically just book-burning fascists. Again, most people would probably agree with me when I say that the 5th column is more of a bad ending for this game.
Are we the baddies?
Lastly, there's Angel, an elusive scientific group led by a mysterious figure known only as Smythe. They represent the very evil root, the same way that every mysterious scientific group that experiments on people in video games does. The main story does a good job of introducing you to Angel as a faction, but it's like they forgot to do the same with Camelot and 5th column, up until they're suddenly shoehorned into the story precisely when they're needed. Ideally, they should have had more of a presence earlier in the main story so that we get the opportunity to learn about them and see them in action. In Fallout New Vegas, you're introduced to Caesar's Legion and the NCR pretty early on, even though they have no direct connection to the main story for quite some time. You can feel their presence in the world, and no matter how you play, you're still going to learn something about each of them. The other problem I had was by the time it came to choosing one of the factions, I still hadn't figured out all the secrets behind the elusive Angel, which was my main motivation for following the main story. As much as I love deciding the fate of everyone around me, I wasn't doing this to fight for a better London. I just wanted to know who I was and what was the purpose behind the secret labs. But the game had other plans, and I was thrust into securing the fate of London for one of the 3 factions. And just to add to what I said before, if at this point you wanted to learn more about each one so you can make an informed decision, well, you're out of luck, as you have to commit to them before they really show you their true colours. For example, if you want to learn more about Camelot, Arthur tells you to speak to Percival. Unfortunately, Percival's locked behind this door, and the only way through is to join Camelot. I'm not sure what went wrong behind the scenes for the game to end up like this, but I know originally there was supposed to be a wildcard ending similar to Yes Man in Fallout New Vegas, which let you choose the ending by deciding which factions live and which ones die.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Unfortunately, the guy that was in charge of doing the wildcard questline wasn't able to finish it because he was basically forcibly conscripted due to the war in Ukraine. The good news is, however, that they've confirmed it will be added in a future update. Hopefully this will give some variety to players, as the current options definitely feel a bit limited. Unless you're happy burning innocent civilians or kidnapping children. For now, you might have to do some more research outside of the game so you can get a better understanding of each faction. Or just pick one, put your head between your knees.
Kiss your bum goodbye.
The reason this issue hits so hard for me is because up until I encountered it, I was really enjoying the game. I went from playing it as often as I could to not even having the motivation to boot it up again. It just took the wind straight out of my sails. However, once I did get into the story, I ultimately enjoyed the ending I received and the steps leading up to it. The mysteries behind Angel, Westminster, and the secret labs all built up into a final climactic showdown that couldn't have been more British if it tried. Without spoilers, I would compare the Final Quest showdown to the Battle of Hoover Dam in New Vegas. The scale, the pacing, and the impact of your decisions all come together nicely to give London that final send-off it deserves. After careful consideration of everything I've just said, and with over 100 hours of playtime in Fallout London, I would give this game a solid 7 out of 10. Just kidding, I'm not IGN.